Life in the camps. Arriving in a concentration camp was a degrading and dehumanizing process. Prisoners had often been arrested around Germany and transported in overcrowded conditions to the camp. In many cases, they had been repeatedly beaten and had gone many hours without food or water. A military style roll call taking several hours took place upon arrival, and those too weak to stand were often beaten. Forced to strip naked, the prisoner's head was shaved and all of his possessions taken. He was assigned a number and a colored code marking his offense and his block in the camp, and given a striped uniform or a mix of discarded military uniform pieces. The uniforms were thin, fit poorly, and provided no protection from the elements. Hats, coats, and blankets were not provided. Prisoner barracks included rows of double or triple tiered bunks with straw mattresses designed to house a set number of prisoners. Individuals were often forced to share bunks as overcrowding increased after 1938. Hygiene facilities, including toilets and washrooms, ranged from minimal to non existent as camp populations increased or horribly inadequate. While prisoners were supposed to receive a weekly shower, this rarely occurred. Sanitation was nearly non existent, contributing to the widespread illness and disease, ranging from skin rashes to typhus. For food rations, estimates range that each prisoner consumed about 1,500 calories per day, depending on the work done. Those on light labor received smaller rations than those working in mines or quarries. Prisoners typically lost several pounds per week, particularly as rations were cut. This significant calorie deficit led to malnutrition and death from eventual starvation at worst. The provided food was nearly totally lacking in nutrition in many camps, often consisting of thin, watery soup and rye bread. During the first years of the concentration camps, packages from families could supplement the poor rations within the camp, and prisoners had access to a small amount of money, allowing them to buy food, toothbrushes, and other items. But after 1941, rations were further reduced. Conditions progressively worsened in the camps between 1939 and 1942. Food rations decreased significantly as the workday was by mandate no less than 11 hours long. Overcrowding in the camps worsened hygiene and led to increased sickness and disease. While the total number of who died from disease, starvation, or the conditions in the camps will never be known, the concentration camps were, even without the active policy of extermination that would follow, responsible for a large number of deaths. New prisoners arrived at the camps daily, adding to the problem. While the majority of these incarcerated in the camps prior to 1939 were men, there were also female prisoners. When Ravensbrück opened in 1939, it housed 900 women. By 1942, some 10,000 were imprisoned in Ravensbrück, and by 45, some 50,000 women. Living conditions at male and female camps were similar, and women's camps suffered from comparable overcrowding and sanitation issues. Women increased their chances of survival while working cooperatively and sharing food, clothing, and information within the camp. Employment as a domestic worker for SS administrators also improved the likelihood of surviving within the concentration camp, but increased the risk of more personal abuses. Other specifically female issues, including pregnancy, reduced the chance of survival. Pregnant women were often executed or forced to have abortions, and the infants were typically killed if the pregnancy was carried to term. Medical experimentation. Some prisoners lost their lives or were permanently disabled by medical experimentation that took place within the camps. While the most infamous of those experiments took place at Auschwitz-Birkenau under the supervision of Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death, experimentation, including surgical experiments, were conducted without anesthesia. The few patients who survived the experiments were killed and autopsied for further study. The medical experiments within the camps can be divided into three categories. Understand battle conditions and improve the survival of Axis troops, and included high-altitude hypothermia and seawater experiments. Experiments in wound care, bone grafts, and amputation took place in the camps. 2. Address diseases, vaccines, and treatments. Prisoners were intentionally infected with various illnesses, including tuberculosis and typhoid. 3. Learn about genetics and race. These experiments sought to illustrate the differences among the races. Some groups were more likely than others to be subjected to this type of experimentation, including twins, those with genetic defects like dwarfism, and pregnant women. Move on to the Google form in today's lesson.